Hello, everyone. Welcome to another podcast. And today I have another special guest with me. Mr. Bryan Beller needs no introduction. And it's my pleasure to talking. How are you doing, Brian?
Doing good, doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for giving us your time. And I know you are a very busy man, but I think during the holidays, things are a little bit calmed down, right? Musically, everybody is like,
Yeah, yeah, sometimes people have New Year's Eve gigs, but I haven't had one of those in a while. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. I'm not sure.
no, I think you have a pretty busy schedule coming up this year, right? With
Yeah, well, but I always, listen, it's funny, you get a reputation for being like really busy. Then, what happens is that people don't call you for work. It's like, hey, I'm not too busy to take work calls, everybody likes to work. So, I'm a bass player who likes to play music. So, but yeah, there's a lot going on in the first half of the year, that's for sure. With the Aristocrats, we've got our first tour back to Australia in 8 years.
no.
2016 was the only time we were there, so we're going back to Australia, and then we're going to do Asia. We did that 2 years ago. We're going to go to lots of cool places: Japan, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Vietnam, India. A lot of cool things. And then we're going to go right from there and then fly to Miami and do the cruise to the Edge.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be a great progressive rock cruise. A lot of great bands on there. The Aristocrats have never done a cruise before.
Yeah.
And then from there, we're going to do a U.S. tour for a month. And so that's all back to back to back to back. It's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, like a lot of busy stuff coming up.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So how you basically plan these tours? Like how long usually it takes to plan these tours?
Well,
Because
I mean, with Aristocrats, like anybody, I mean, like, everybody, you got to kind of plan for these things like 9 to 12 months in advance these days.
mm-hmm.
Uh, and, you, you get a booking agent, you book the venues, and then you have a tour manager and gets the logistics together. And it's like all the things. Uh, the most important thing is that there's enough interest that you can do a tour in the first place. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly the Aristocrats who are playing some very strange instrumental music, where I know we're very grateful that we can do that at all, uh, especially in places like, Asia.
Yeah, I mean Chicago is I'm from Chicago, so Chicago is always sold out. I mean it's
Well, we did the Bottom Lounge this time. It was a big
big,
venue,
big venue, yeah.
bigger than we were doing. We started off in Martyrs, which is a great, cool instrumental club, and then in Chicago, and then we did Reggie's for a long time, and Robbie, who runs Reggie's, is a great guy, and he treated us very well. But we sold it out like 2 or 3 times in a row, so we had to kind of go somewhere bigger, and that's what we did. We did the Bottom Lounge this last time, and that was a fun show too.
Yeah, I remember once Chicago was sold out, so I traveled to Milwaukee to catch up
Oh
you
wow.
you guys. So it was really fun. I mean, always enjoy your music. So I mean, you have a incredible career with working with all different artists throughout. How you differentiate, or you can say, what you call it, how you vary, diverse your playing style according to each projects.
Well, I mean, I really try and just play the song. Like, even inside everybody's artistry, like, Joe Satriani has a lot of different sounding songs. Same with Steve Vai.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you just want to listen to the song and the melody. And I always say the song will tell you what to do, especially if you're a bass player. I'm there to create and provide the harmonic and rhythmic foundation for the band as the bass, the key kind of fulcrum instrument between the rhythm elements and the harmonic elements,
Mm-hmm.
drummers, everybody else, and only bass sits in the middle. So it's important that we listen to this song, make sure that we're doing everything we can to support that, and that makes it a really kind of easy global mission. Whether you're
Mm-hmm.
playing for Joe Satriani or Steve Vai, or doing a metal gig, or doing my own solo stuff, or doing aristocrat stuff, that that will always work.
Mm-hmm.
Playing the song and supporting the band.
Yeah, that's I think good approach to take. So how you actually get started playing bass at the first place, like going back to your early days?
I was a piano player first, and then it was told that I would join the school orchestra, and I was like, I don't really want to do that. So maybe if I pick the most obnoxious instrument in the orchestra, my parents won't make me join the orchestra. So I chose the upright bass, right? Because like, who's gonna want to carry that? Well, they did it anyway, and so next thing I know, I'm playing upright bass in the orchestra. and that was from when I was like 10 years old to 13. And then I wanted to play only electric
Hmm.
bass in the jazz band. It was the same teacher who was doing the jazz band and the orchestra, and he wasn't a good guy. And he was like, "Well, if you want to play in the jazz band, you have to keep playing in the orchestra."
Hmm.
And I'm like, "What if I just want to play in the jazz band?" He's like, "That option's not available." I was like, "Here's an option for you. How about I play in neither of them? Fuck you." And that's what I did. I quit. And I was out of the school music program for years after that. I just kind of played on my own. I started playing electric, and I remember I was playing the Stray Cats "Rock This Town,"
Hmm.
on upright, which is an upright song. Ba-doo, boo, doo, 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 doo. And I played it so much that like it was like the first fun thing I'd ever played on upright. My fingers got completely destroyed. And I was like, this sucks. I want to play electric. Not a very inspiring story, I'm sure.
So when you think like you were feeling okay, you got your first break and get into this music industry.
Well, I was at Berklee College of Music, and I was fortunate enough to run into a guy named Joe Travers, who was a drummer. He's a big, big Frank Zappa fan,
Mm-hmm.
and was a very, very driven guy. And he left Boston for Los Angeles because he was older than me. He graduated before I did. He didn't graduate actually. Just well, yeah, he got a diploma. And anyway, he left Berkeley uh, before I did. He wanted me to come to LA with him, even though I wasn't done with school. And I was like, because we were playing his rhythm section at the school. He was a great drummer. And I was like, I can't do that. I haven't graduated. He's like, you idiot. You don't need to graduate. Just come to LA. Of course, he was right, but like I didn't know that at the time. Anyway, Frank was no longer doing touring because he was already sick. But his son Dweezil had a band, and
Mm-hmm.
Joe famously told everybody in Boston that he was going to go to Los Angeles and get the Dweezil Zappa gig, even though Dweezil already had a drummer named Josh Freese, who was 18 years old at the time.
Wow.
Crazy how that. Anyway, 6 months later, Joe called all of us. He was like, "I've got the gig." We were like, "You're not human. You're a god. How'd you do that?" We were all like 19, 20 years old at Berkeley. Anyway, he got me an audition for the bass slot in that band. I was going to be in a blues band, an original blues rock band. We were going to move to New York. We had the whole thing worked out. And then Joe called me from LA and was like, I can get you an audition for this band if you want to come out here.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, and I passed it, and I completely just left my life on the East Coast and moved to LA. And then from that point on, I was known. You start playing with Dweezil Zappa. You're one of those guys who played with a Zappa guy. And next thing I know, Steve Vai asked me to do a recording with him. And then I was playing with Mike Keneally, who was Frank Zappa's last guitarist in the 1988 band. And now I'm like playing with all these guitarists, and like it's turning into that kind of thing. And and then James LeBrie called, and I did a couple of solo albums with him. So it was like clear where the niche was, where I was working, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't design it like that because I never set out to be like Billy Sheehan or Stu Hamm or somebody like that. I'm not a really extended technique player. I can get around, but I'm not like you know
I
watch
mean,
this. You know what I mean? That's not what I do. Uh, but fortunately, there was a space for that in the instrumental guitar world.
so what your major influences were like when you were growing up as a bass player? Like which players you were looking up to, you know?
John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin was my first big guy.
Mm-hmm.
Real groove, earthy. I mean, he just copied everything from James Jamerson anyway. From the Motown stuff. But like in a rock idiom, and the tone and the groove were always so solid. And he could be melodic too, like on Ramble On and What Is and What Should Never Be. That was cool. and and then I was into Flea slapping. Like I learned to slap from Flea with my thumb down, not like a fusion guy, not like Marcus Miller with the thumb up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a vibe. Uh, and I listened to Cliff Burton when I was a kid, so that's where that my distorted wah stuff comes from. And uh, and then I got into like a little bit of a fusion phase. Of course, I listened to a lot of Jocko and John Patitucci when the Chick Corea Electric Band was a thing. Even though I was never a jazz
Mm-hmm.
player, I would listen to a lot of that. And then I started getting into more kind of aggressive tonal stuff, like Tim Comfort from Rage Against the Machine really informed my main overdrive sound. I really wanted it to be
Mm-hmm.
like that. And then Scott Tunis, the bass player from the 1980s Apple bands, who's not like one of the names you always hear, but he really influenced me in terms of the way that you could think about rock music and approach it from a almost counterpunctual, you know, uh, way, like thinking of counter melodies and reharmonizations that you could do to, that wouldn't necessarily normally be there. He's a real thinking man's bass player. So those are my bass influences.
Yeah, that's, I mean, you have pretty solid influences. So, so my, like, Aristocrats, you formed, I think, during a NAM show jam, that band was formed. So how, like, what is the main challenge or rewarding when playing with these players like Marco Miniman, Guthrie Govan, or maybe Steve Vai, Joe Satriani? You played with like a lot of, high-profile guitar players and musicians. What is the
Well, I don't, when I'm playing with them, I don't think of them as like, oh my God, it's this high profile guy. I'm just listening to them and being like, what's the best way to support this artist right now? You know, I,
Hmm.
I always, in the Aristocrats, I always make an analogy that like I'm on the ground holding two kites and it's windy, you know?
Yeah,
But someone's got to be on the ground or the whole thing's going to float away.
yeah.
So, uh, and again with Steve or Joe, whatever, those are two completely different missions, but the purpose is the same, which is to make them feel comfortable so they can do what they do, you know? That's why they're hiring a band, is so that they can realize the vision of their own artistry and their own songs and then feel comfortable getting out in front of, you know, walking on the high wire in front of thousands of people.
Yeah. So with Aristocrats, there is like a sense of, humor in the songs as well. Your song titles have humor, plus they are very technical. How you basically take that approach? Like, what do you
That's the
think?
Frank Zappa formula. We just, when we all realized that we were Frank Zappa fans, and we were like, oh, okay, so we could play a lot of notes and we can also take the piss at the same time. It was like that's we could make an ethos out of that and do
Yeah,
our version of it, which of course we don't sound like Frank Zappa at all. But the idea that you can do that is his original idea, I think.
yeah. So I mean, I really like your approach as a band, where you have decided, okay, everybody will write three songs and nobody will touch their, uh, production ideas. Basically, who came up with this
Yeah.
idea? You know?
Well, it was by default on the first album, and then we just started rolling with it. But and it served us well. It also was a nice way to make albums because when you only have to write three songs,
Yeah,
you can get to an album more quickly, right?
yeah,
As opposed to having to write an hour of music. I mean, I have a solo album. I wrote 88 minutes of music, and it took me 4 years. You know, so they're different missions. But yeah, I mean, on the last album. On Duck, Marco and I actually got into a little bit of kind of like co-production on some aspects of the album, which is very unusual for us
hmm,
as a band. But we did it because we were kind of working through the concept of it.
hmm.
Uh, Really, in the end, everybody's compositions they contribute is their own, and they get the final say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good approach if you want to keep the band together, for young musicians as well, because a lot of fights happens. Hey, I'm writing all the songs and stuff
You
like
just
that.
yeah, well, I mean, everybody you have to contribute equally in order to get equal treatment, and
Yeah,
as long as that's, I mean, I don't know how a person band works like that, but with three, there was something elegant about it. Three songs for three guys, 9 songs. It's pretty much going to be an hour every time.
yeah.
So
So when you're writing your songs, how you come? Do you write like lead guitar parts and drum parts as well? Like how you prepare demos, everything?
yeah, so for me, I have superior drummer.
Hmm.
I enjoy drum programming. I'm a frustrated drummer myself. I'm glad I never decided to play drums because these limbs won't do it. But in my mind, I'm this incredible drummer. Like I can just I've been watching great drummers my whole life, so I can just see everything. Like I know what I would do if I could move my limbs in that way, but of course I can't. So it's fun to program as if I could do that. And also I'm programming to the person too. Like if I'm programming for Marco, I've been playing with Marco for 15 years now. I
Yeah.
know what his tendencies are and everything. And so if there's a certain thing that implies that he'll do a certain thing in a place, then I'm writing it like as a band member. Like it's cool. I know that if I write this little bit here, you'll do something like that. And like, here's the time to do it. Like, I'm not telling him what to do. I'm just leaving him the space for like to be like, okay, it's like that. And same with Guthrie. Now, listen, I'm not a good guitarist. I can play guitar, but like only really in the studio. I can't really get on stage and play guitar live. And so one of the jokes about this band from the very beginning is that, I'm sitting here writing music for like the greatest guitarist maybe on earth today. It's just
Yeah.
Guthrie. No disrespect to anybody else, but like all the other guitarists always look at Guthrie and they're like, okay, that guy's an alien. And he is. And so I'm sitting here writing for Guthrie and like, I gotta play it on guitar and make sure that what I'm thinking of is playable. I've gotten better at it over the years. In the beginning, it was really rudimentary for me, and I really relied a lot on him to be like, "Oh, you meant this, right?" And I'm like,
Hmm.
"Yes, I did." Now I can voice it out, and I can really give it to him. Like stuff like something is,
Hmm.
"This is not Scrotum." One of the songs on the new album is a really, really kind of complicated melody in 9/8, and I just sat there and played it until I could get enough of it and punch it together, and then give it to him. He's like, "Yep, okay, I know what this is," and he just does it. So
Hmm.
as a function of knowing each other as well as we do. And those guys do the same thing. We write for each other, even though we're making our demos ourselves. Guthrie is a great bass player and he can program drums, although he'll tell you that he can't. And Marco obviously plays drums and can play guitar and bass. So we can all do the things needed to
Hmm.
make our own demos. And if you run usually in the deluxe version of each one of our albums, the demos are on there. So you
Ah.
can hear my guitar solos and you can hear Marco's, guitar and bass parts, and you can hear Guthrie playing bass. It's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, you usually do like documentary type of videos as well,
Yeah,
on the
a
deluxe
little.
edition. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, talking about your, you did a orchestra album as well with the Aristocrats. How you basically prepare for it, and what is different challenges were involved in that?
The truth is that we really didn't do very much on that because like we just had them record to the existing tracks, which we remixed. The remix was so revolutionary. And
Hmm.
then adding the orchestra, it almost made it sound like we retracked it, but we
Hmm.
didn't. We didn't. It's all the original tracks.
Okay.
And the mix engineer who did the original stuff is a guy named Mark Niemiec, which is great. But Forrester Saville, our mix engineer mostly right now, has a lot of experience with kind of putting a lot of information into one cohesive space and being able to
Hmm.
hear everything. And so it was really instructive going back to those original multi-track mixes and then sending it to him and then getting the orchestra performances. It really did feel like the songs were reborn in a way.
So this was like your orchestra played to your existing tracks,
Yeah.
but you were not involved in conducting or anything like.
No,
Oh,
no, the
oh.
orchestra has a conductor, they just did their thing and we advised in the arrangements. We would hear a demo of the arrangement and then we would advise. Uh, but yeah, generally we kind of left them alone and just let them
Hmm.
do their thing, and then we would like review what they'd done. If we felt something was weird, we'd say something, but we hardly ever did.
Okay, talking about your solo album, your last solo album was Scenes from the Flood. What was basically idea behind it, writing it, and
Well, it was so. This is the thing for the aristocrats. We're constantly trying to find ways to like blow people's minds and make people laugh.
Hmm.
You want to like write some wacky stuff. Maybe there's a lot of notes, but there's also like tongue in cheek. There's jokes in the music and all the rest of that stuff. Like I said, the Frank Zappa formula. My solo material is much more contemplative and serious, and I'm like trying to tackle heavy topics and on scenes from the flood. I've been a little shy in kind of talking what it was actually about because I didn't want to give too much away. You tell someone like what a really deep personal thing is to you, and then suddenly they're not listening to the album the same way that they were listening to it.
Yeah.
So I want to leave room for that. But the album deals with you know living in the intentional living space and how that collides and doesn't coexist with very well some of the more unlovely aspects of human nature and how we all have our intentions and our dreams and our hopes and what happens when we get out there and try and kind of bring them into the real world and one of the concepts of the album is what happens when there's some really really traumatic event that disturbs all of this like who do we become and where are we left with
Hmm.
after something like that happens you know how do we deal with other human beings and how do they deal with us in the middle of heavy trauma. So
Hmm.
that is definitely not aristocrats material right there. But I
Yeah.
really did my best to try and take it and tackle it like something serious like a Pink Floyd album would deal. Pink Floyd albums deal a lot with disillusionment They do a
Mm.
beautiful way of describing disillusionment. That's what a lot of it's about.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails as well.
Mm.
Uh, again, that's like serious, heavy stuff. Uh, and of course, there's some stuff from Steve and Joe that's crept in there over the years because I played with them for so much. As a matter of fact, one of the lead off tracks on the album is kind of like the album starts in a very optimistic place, and it's this very kind of mid-tempo, optimistic rock song. And it's like, as soon as I finished the demo, I was just like, "This is Joe Satriani's song." It is. And so I asked him to do it, and he did it, and it's wonderful. So that's Volunteer State. Uh, but the album gets darker as it goes on, and uh, I'm just grateful that to all the musicians who contributed to it. John Petrucci plays a solo on one of the climactic songs. It's really, really heavy, kind of Eastern flavored, epic progressive song.
Mhm.
Uh, and uh, and the drummer from Death Clock, Gene Hogan is on it because there's a couple of metal songs because
Mhm.
there's different voices and characters in the album, and that's one of the voices. Is that really aggressive metal stuff? Uh, and Mike Dawes is a ridiculous acoustic guitar player who does a lot of touring with Tommy Emmanuel, and he's on the album as
Yeah.
well.
He's amazing.
Yeah, he's amazing. And Joe Travers, my dear friend, the one who got me into Weasel Zappa's band, is one of the main drummers on the album. Him and Ray Hearn from Haken is on there.
Mhm.
Mike Keneally is on there. It's like a lot of people
Yeah,
I
a
know.
lot of good heavy
Yeah.
guest list.
And it's
So
a concept album. It's a double concept album. It's four sides, four vinyl sides. It's 88 minutes. It took me forever.
yeah.
Uh, so it was nice to go after I did that and got it out into the world uncompromisingly. It was nice to go back to the Aristocrats and
Mhm.
and be like, hey, it's nice to just write three songs. It's nice to keep things light. So the balance is good.
So where can we get that album from
Seeds from the
Aristocrat?
Blood, you could get right from my if you go to my website, just bryanbeller.com, which is bryanbeller.com. You can get it there, and you go to the store page, and there's different links to you can get it
Mhm.
from Bandcamp if you want to actually have high quality download audio files. That's a good place to get them. Or you can get physical stuff. I just printed some blue vinyl, which is really cool,
Yeah.
of the album. So it's all there at my website, which is bryanbeller.com.
Yeah, we'll definitely check that out. The blue vinyl was on my eyes on it, and I kind of forgot. I think in checkout somewhere. So I'll definitely check
Yeah,
this out.
yeah,
So
yeah.
talking about your gear, what you are using these days?
For amplification, I'm a Galleon Kruger guy. I mean, people who've known me for a long time know that I actually worked at SWR for many years when that
Mhm.
company was a company. It's a long time ago now, from 97 to 2004. And then the company basically shut down in 2008. And I was a big part of that company. I was I helped manage the company and all the rest of that stuff.
Mhm.
So for a while there, I was identified with SWR, but I always was aware of Galleon Kruger, that Galleon Kruger had been around longer than SWR. They go all
Mhm.
the way back to the early 70s, and I always liked their gear. And when SWR shuttered finally, uh, I went to a soundstage because I was worked in the MI industry. I knew guys who worked at all these different amp companies. I was one of them, and I was just like, "You're not going to believe this, but I'm looking for a new touring rig now because my company doesn't exist anymore."
Mhm.
And I had all the big rigs in there. I had like an Ampeg rig, and an Aguilar rig, a PV rig, and Hard Key, and all the big bass brands. And objectively, nothing to do with like deals or endorsements or anything like that. Just objectively, I felt that Galleon Kruger blew them all out of the water in terms of what I wanted, which was a really fast, powerful response, hair trigger for when your finger touches the string. And that's
Mhm.
what really counts when you're on stage with a loud drum kit and loud guitars and all the rest. So I'm a Galleon Kruger guy now, and I have been since 2011. And
Mhm.
they've been great to me, and I feel like that is a great kind of voice for what I'm trying to do on stage.
Mhm.
Mike Lowell basses. I've been playing Mike Lowell basses for 20 years, also 25 years now.
Mhm.
Uh, different flavors, but all the same craftsmanship. And my hands really love them. I get around with them better than any other instrument. Like a lot of, usually it's a five string, usually it's jazz bass of some kind, some boutique setup. And D'Addario strings always. Pro
Mhm.
Steels, been using them for 25 years. Those are my big three: D'Addario strings and accessories, and Gallien Kruger amplification, and micro basses. I also use some Dunlop MXR pedals and an Exotica pedal called the Bass BB Preamp.
Okay, nice. So your recording setup, I think last Joe Satriani album you recorded at home, or what I
The
heard?
whole thing. I recorded all of Elephants of Mars at home in a very modest setup. I don't have any not a lot, no real outboard gear. I have a couple DIs and a couple pedals, but like it's just straight in the Apollo using the Neve 1073 and the 1176 compressor plugins. Get a good gain structure, use the right instrument, attack it the right way, and go. And that's it. I mean, it's like there was some. Joe is very very particular. Doesn't come off that way maybe, but he is, especially about recordings, and like it worked out great.
Yeah, I mean
So
the first
he,
thing was the first single Sahara. I think when I
yeah,
heard it, it was like really the bass came out. It was really good bass line, and first thing was noticed like was really good melody, of course, but the bass is really prominent there. Was really.
I feel like, a lot of these instrumental albums, the bass doesn't get mixed quite as well as I would like. But I think that sometimes bass is a funny thing to record. It's much more difficult than guitar and drums, I think, to get a really good full range bass sound, and you have to monitor in a certain way. I could go on for an hour about that. I'm not going to, but there are definitely things that you can do to improve the chances that your bass will be mixed well on an album. And there are also things that you can do that will ensure that the mix will not be bass heavy. And so I try and stay on the first side of that equation as much as I can. I can deliver something that sounds good. So the engineer's like, hey, let's hear more of that.
Yeah, so do you like also double track bass, or like some people do like high end different and low end different? No, double.
Well, some people split the tracks and then they,
Yeah,
they, they fuck with it in post, but I don't do that.
no. Okay,
I
yeah.
have a clean signal and a dirty signal. That's it. I just send it. A lot of times I just send the clean signal and then the mix engineer will reamp that clean signal into whatever the hell they want. So it's out
Hmm.
of my hands at that point.
Yeah, so you just send DI tracks, and with the Aristocrat last album also, that was done in the studio or like at home?
That was mostly done in the studio. We usually do the whole album in the studio, but we were 3 tracks short,
Mm-hmm.
ran out of time. And so we did 3 tracks at home, and that worked out well too.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we all have done it for other people, so we just did it for each other, and it worked out fine.
That's awesome. So a few years ago, I think your bass gear was stolen.
Just thinking about that makes me tired.
Did you get everything back, or still missing
I
few items?
got I got the electronics back, but out of the 7 instruments that were stolen, I got one back.
Oh,
The death clock bass. That's the one that came back.
yeah. That
But the
that's
other,
that's the most heartbreaking story, and I was kind of following that. It was like really.
I could do an hour-long podcast just on the stuff I didn't say about that story because it continued after wrote publicly about it because I was trying to once we for anyone who's watching this and doesn't know the story, I had a lot of bases stolen in the end of 2016, and I'm a little OCD, and I kind of freaked out and like went full detective for like a weekend, and I got really, really lucky and I slept very, very little. And somehow I figured out who they were, where they were going to be, and called the cops. And like 10 cop cars came and arrested them because they were wanted for all sorts of other shit that had nothing to do with me.
Hmm.
So that was a really exciting moment. Except when we arrested them, there was a storage space. That's where they were. They were at their storage space. And I thought for sure that we were going to open up their storage space. My instruments were going to come tumbling out of there, and they didn't. They weren't in there. They'd already fenced them. And so then I
Hmm.
tried to like go track down what had happened to them, and they just ended up in the hands of some very bad people who
Hmm.
didn't really give a shit about whether or not they were instruments or anything. They had bigger fish to fry, but somehow they ended up with these instruments, and it just got weird, like trying to chase them down. And I don't think nothing good was going to come of it. And then after a while, they were like, "You should leave us alone." And I was like, "That's probably a good idea, sure."
And one last question. I think there is a. I think I read the interview that Guthrie said you have like 10-year plan for Aristocrat or something.
That
Can-
was some comment. That was some comment from the Culture Clash DVD. Where that was our second album. It was the first time we were doing a video shoot, and we were talking about like, well, are we going to keep doing this or not? Because it was only our second album, right? We hadn't even really toured. Like we hadn't done a real tour yet, And I just made some comment like, oh, let's
And
just so because the interviewer asked me like, what are your plans for your future? And I said, let's just get through the next album. I was like, I mean, I have ideas for a 5-year plan, but nobody wants. It's really boring. I was an offhand remark, or I may have said 10-year plan. Uh, and then like, here we were 10 years later, and like, we're still going, and like we've done all this work, and we put out 5 albums now, and we toured the world a few times, and someone was cheeky enough to like go pull up that video, like, ooh, look, you got a 10-year plan. I'm like, I have a plan. The plan was make an album and go on tour. What's the plan?
so, what do you think about AI taking involvement in the music industry? Like, have you seen like throughout this, like, what different things are happening?
I have no opinion. I don't want to get in the middle of that because I don't really pay much attention to it, to be honest with you. You know, I'm not here to expound on these topics. Other people surely know a lot more than I do.
So, uh, so yeah, I mean, what to expect? I mean, in 2025 from you and the band.
Well, lots of aristocrat stuff. We're like I said, we're going to Asia, we're going to Australia, we're doing the cruise, we're doing America, and then we might have more touring plans later in the year, but I can't talk about it yet because you know how it is. You can't say anything until it's a thing.
Yeah.
So just watch the websites and the socials. On Facebook, I'm Brian Beller Bass. On Instagram, I'm Brian Beller Bass. On Twitter, I am just Brian Beller.
Hmm. Thanks,
And
Brian, for your
listening,
time and
very welcome. Thank you.